Welcome to After Dark Online, All That Remains. Thanks for joining us again as we continue to explore our world through science, art, and conversation. My name is Sam Sharkland, and I'm a program developer as part of the team that produces After Dark. And this program is coming to you virtually, but the Exploratorium is located on Pier 15 in San Francisco, on unceded territory traditionally belonging to the Ramaytush Ohlone. We recognize that we are guests on this land, and we honor the conservation and stewardship the Ohlone have offered the ecology we inhabit, past, present, and continuing into the future. Tonight, we continue our theme, Okay with Decay, how things fall apart, and how things change, and what room is left for revisions and remixes. Tonight, in All That Remains, we're looking at organic matter and how that decays. We're going to continue our Odd Salon residency, a storytelling series from the odd corners of science, history, art, and adventure, with a new installment themed around organic decay. But first, we have a bit of a game for you. In Decomposing Images, one of our living systems technicians, Alex Pinigis, is going to share with us some close-up photos of all sorts of matter that is in various states of decay. See if you can guess what we're looking at. We hope you enjoy the program. Well, thanks again, Alex, for joining us at After Dark Online. As we know, you're a biologist in our Living Systems lab at the Exploratorium. And tonight, since we're looking at how living organisms decay, you've taken some photos of close-up organisms of things decaying. Is that right?
Yeah, so in the biolab for a while, we've been testing out a couple different ways for people to take photos at home using their phone of microscopic things. And one of them is actually a little tiny lens that you can tape onto the lens of your camera phone, and it will let you zoom in very close onto something that you can't see without help. So we have a couple different slides of very, very small things, and we're going to take a look at them and see if you can guess what they are.
I'm looking forward to it. Let's see them.
All right, awesome. So I'm about to share my screen with you now. And here is our first slide. So what do you notice about this?
The color is what pops out for me first. It looks like a fuchsia or purple color. But I also notice what looks like veins or cell walls and a gradation. It actually looks like it gets lighter up top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so any guesses what this might be?
No guesses. I don't know. Radish skin?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So we've settled on something in the plant kingdom, it sounds like.
Yes, that's what I think.
All right, so what in the plant kingdom, you're not right with radish, but what might have a similar color, like a fuchsia color?
The next thing that I think of is flowers.
Yes, so you are definitely on the right track with that. This is, well, what part of a flower would you imagine this is?
Well, the petal, the colorful part.
So that would make sense. What we are in fact looking at is a bougainvillea flower. This came off the bougainvillea vine in my front yard. Normally, the whole thing would be that bright fuchsia color. This is in the process of dying. However, this is actually not the petal of a bougainvillea flower. Many flowers have other structures other than petals that give them the actual look of the flower. And oftentimes that's a sepal, which is a lot like a petal, but it's a little bit different. This is actually not even a sepal, this is a bract. So bracts, you notice the veins in the structure of that. That's because a bract is actually a modified leaf, not a petal. So it has that same veined structure as a leaf. And yeah, I really enjoyed that gradation from the fuchsia to the, it looked white in the very close up, but from here you can tell it's a very light brown.
It's
Um,
beautiful, and it just looks like the color is kind of draining out of there, and that's, as you mentioned, because this is no longer connected to its sustaining life force and is dying.
yeah, exactly. And that process has been going on all summer. This started blooming in June. These will all be dead probably by October or November. Most of them are dead by now.
All right.
And
What
this
else
is
you got?
actually what that flower looks like if you look at the entire
Holy
structure.
cow.
And from that, you can actually see right here in the middle are the actual flowers of the bougainvillea. So this right here is the petals.
Mm-hmm.
And I took another photo of that zoomed in, and you can actually see here, we can see the actual, the pollen in the flower. These very tiny little granules are the pollen.
Nice. I
All
think I
right.
have a sense of this now. What else you got? I'm going to do better this next time.
All
Oh,
right. So this one is a little tough to parse. I wonder if you'll be able to figure this one out.
well, at first it looks like under my couch before I vacuum. It looks like maybe dust bunnies collected somewhere, but knowing that this maybe was something that was alive, I don't know if dust bunnies collect on those.
Uh-huh.
But obviously I see some orange or ochre color, but I
Hmm.
have no idea. It looks like it could be mold on a fruit, maybe?
Yeah, you are exactly right. So what fruit do you think it might be?
Um, based on the color, peach, I think.
No, actually, it's an orange. I thought you might get it just from the color orange.
You would think that I'm that perceptive, but no. I've never
So
seen a moldy orange.
yeah, so this is the moldy orange. This is actually a very, I believe, I wasn't actually able to 100% identify this mold. I did ask a fungus expert, and they said my identification seemed correct, but they weren't 100% sure. Um, so this is probably from the genus Penicillium,
Mm-hmm.
which may sound familiar.
It does.
This is probably Penicillium italicum or digitatum. There is another common type of Penicillium mold that infects citrus fruit called expansum, but that actually attacks healthy fruit.
Mm.
So I don't think it's that one. This one was just going on the skin, and these oranges, which I've been getting from our friends, they do seem to only get moldy when the fruit is bruised or somehow injured. So that makes me think that this is probably Italicum or digitatum, which generally attack only the injured parts of an orange fruit.
Huh.
Because these fungi attack citrus fruits, they are very highly studied, especially in California, where citrus is
Mhm.
such an important agricultural product. Um, Earlier, I mentioned that the name penicillium might sound familiar. Any guesses why?
It sounds like penicillin, which is something I know as you can get in a shot or is it a shot or is it that you take orally?
You definitely take it orally. I believe when it was first invented, you might have gotten shots. They might actually still administer shots of penicillin in extreme cases, but I didn't go to medical school, so I
But
can't
it's
speak
used
to
as
that.
an antibiotic, is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. So many people may be familiar with the fact that penicillin, the first antibiotic that was ever discovered, came from a mold. And this is the same genus of mold that that
Wow.
came from. And actually, in the early years of penicillin, it was just difficult to produce enough of it. The first person who was ever treated with penicillin made a remarkable recovery after being administered his doses of penicillin, but because they didn't have enough to complete the course, he actually died
Mm.
because they were unable to completely fight back the infection,
Still,
tragically.
that's incredible results. That's from decay or decay on the orange, there can grow life. And from that
Yeah,
life, we can also protect other life. That's so
yeah,
wild.
definitely. All right, time for the next one.
Okay. This looks disgusting. I don't know where you took this photo, but again, I see fuzzies, which makes me say mold again.
Uh-huh.
But
You're
I
on the
don't
right
know.
track
It's
again.
it's an interesting surface that it looks like it's on. It's but it's very haunting. It's like some sort of haunted stain. Because I think you're still in your refrigerator here, I'm going to guess it's mold on a mushroom, maybe?
No, not a mushroom. But it sounds like you're going based on the color.
Yes.
All right. So what else can you think of that would grow mold in my kitchen? You are correct. This did come from my kitchen. In this day of sheltering in place, a lot of this stuff is coming from inside my house. So what
It's
else do you
coming from
think of
inside
that's
the
bright?
house. Oh, cauliflower is what I go straight to then, if I'm thinking of things in your refrigerator.
So it didn't actually come out of my refrigerator. This is an onion.
Oh, wow.
Let me just move on to that image. And this is
It's
actually
so
a very,
obvious when you show me.
yeah. So this is another very common type of food mold. This is called Aspergillus niger. It grows on a lot of different food crops. It also affects grapes, for instance. One really interesting thing about Aspergillus niger is that it actually produces a lot of really useful enzymes for industry. So there's one enzyme that it creates called pectinase,
Mm-hmm.
which is used in wine production because it clarifies it. It removes the cloudiness from wines and ciders. It's also used in the production of high fructose corn syrup. It produces an enzyme called glucoamylase that's used in the breakdown of the long chain starches into high fructose corn syrup. And it produces another enzyme called alpha galactosidase, which you might be familiar with if you're like me. You occasionally have to take Beano after a meal.
Ah.
Alpha galactosidase helps break down complex sugars that our guts can't handle. And in our guts, those complex sugars are then instead broken down by bacteria, which produce methane. So that leads to flatulence. If you ever have a bean-heavy meal and you need to prevent the inevitable outcome, alpha galactosidase will help with that.
So we didn't talk about this in the last slide, but the the mold there is doing what to the skin of this onion or to the skin of the fruit? How is it interacting with the food?
So a lot of times molds are going to break down dead tissue or
Mm.
injured tissue. Most of the time, they're not going to attack healthy cells. And that's just the way it is with most things that cause decay. They don't really like attacking healthy things. Actually, a really good example of that is maggots.
Mhm.
Maggots like to eat dead things. They don't like to eat living things. So in ancient times, and actually even starting again fairly recently, there's a rather revolting technique called maggot therapy, which is used on wounds, where in order to prevent a wound from getting infected, you can pack it with sterile maggots. And the maggots will eat away the dead tissue, preventing it from becoming infected by bacteria and spreading to the living tissue. But the only downside is then you do have to have a wound crawling with maggots,
I am hoping
which
that's not in a future slide you have to
it
share.
is not in a future slide.
But I want to guess again. Let's see what's next.
All right. So,
Mm.
any ideas what this is?
This is quite beautiful. I see a lot of different textures. It almost looks like a spider web with morning dew on it. But there's definitely at least three layers I'm seeing: the
Mm-hmm.
cobweb, the darker kind of branch structures, and then a tan base layer, which also looks like it has texture. But because my mind went to spiders first, I'm wondering if this is some sort of bug that's decomposing.
Oh, interesting. No, it's definitely not that. This is we're still in the realm of plants. I'll give you that hint.
All right, I'm going to go cantaloupe.
Cantaloupe. Okay, so this one actually did not come from inside the house. This is one of the ones that I left the house for. I'll give you one more hint. I found this up in Redwood Regional Park.
You're too generous. I don't know. There's a lot of redwoods there. I know that, and lots of other types of trees too. But I would just go back to mushroom again then if I'm going to guess about on this.
So yeah, this is actually a piece of wood from a decomposing log.
Wow.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because the decomposition of wood is incredibly interesting. Wood is mostly composed of dead cells, and the structure of it comes from the cell walls, which are composed, as many people know, mostly of cellulose. What a lot of people don't know is that there's another really important structural component of wood and plants in general called lignin. And lignin is actually kind of it's just another polymer that lends additional strength to the cell walls. But lignin is actually much more difficult to break down than cellulose. There are a lot of microorganisms and other living things that can break cellulose down into sugar.
Mm-hmm.
But lignin is much more difficult. And lignin actually evolved, as you can probably guess, before the ability to digest lignin, way, way back in Earth's history, when wood first became a thing that plants could grow. And that was in the Carboniferous era. What do you know about the Carboniferous era?
I know nothing other than it sounds like carbon, and I know that carbon is pretty essential to most, if not all, living things, and that I know that trees can hold on to carbon, they can sequester carbon.
Yes, all of those are true. The Carboniferous era is called that because of the huge deposits of coal put down in that era. There was a ton of carbon dioxide that came out of the atmosphere and was fixed into the cellulose that makes up wood. Now, when those trees died, because there was nothing that could decompose the lignin in the wood, the trees just fell and never rotted. And so they just built up on top of each other, layers and layers and layers of wood, which over time fossilized into coal. So when we're burning coal, generally what we're burning is wood from millions and millions and millions of years ago.
And wood that today might be decomposed before it even has a chance to become coal.
For sure.
So
exactly.
That speaks doubly so as to what a limited resource these that we extract are, because the process isn't even as available as it was, even though it kicked off millions and millions of years ago.
Yes, yeah, coal. I don't know if there are ways that coal is produced anymore, like in the geological era, but it's certainly, if it is happening at all, it's not happening at nearly the rate that it did in the Carboniferous era. And actually, one other thing I wanted to talk about with this, as a recently new homeowner, many people who own a home are familiar with the concept of dry rot, which is also caused by a fungus. And dry rot is actually a really bad misnomer. Dry rot cannot happen when the wood is completely dry. Fungi in general need moisture to be able to decompose the wood that they're growing on. So in general, if you have dry rot in your home, you actually should, the first thing you should do before even replacing the rotted wood is to find the source of the water, seal that off, and make sure that no more water is coming through there. But what's really cool is you can actually see, if this video will play, there we go. You can see how the decomposition changes the texture of wood, so you can just crumble it. By breaking down the cellulose and the lignin, you're actually just basically removing all of the hardness and structure of the wood.
Very cool.
All right, shall we move on?
Yeah, I'm gonna get one right.
This is a hard one.
I don't know, but these photos are getting better and better and spookier and spookier. We just had like a haunted forest background, and this looks like blood. I'm also thinking it looks like the models of the coronavirus that we see because of its globular shape and some of those things sticking out. The nice interpretation would be raspberries, but I know we're too close to see that. But I mostly see a spongy background. So my first guess is going to be bread that was left out way, way, way too long.
Okay.
With some raspberry jam.
So that's very interesting. This one was kind of mean because I actually was not able to identify this. Um, this is, I believe, another fungus that's growing on something. It's really cool that you noticed the spongy background, though, because what we're looking
Oh,
at
wow.
is some roots of a rotted Phalaenopsis orchid.
Hmm.
I don't know if you can actually see the red patches on here. They're very, very small. But I really loved the spiky little red balls of this fungus. And it was cool that that you noticed the spongy
Mm-hmm.
material, because that's one really cool thing about the roots of the orchid is they, because they grow off the ground, they don't grow in soil, they grow living, up in the air on trees or other raised surfaces. um, their roots need to be able to absorb moisture from the air, and so they
Mm.
have this very spongy outer layer that is able to just absorb moisture right out of the air.
That's amazing. And did you see this fungus before you took the lens to it to get a close-up look? Was that something you had previously noted, or was this a
No,
discovery?
yeah, that was an accidental discovery. What I was trying to get was a photo of the white mold that was
Mm.
growing on the roots. And that was, it was just kind of like a fuzzy, stringy white mold. It looked basically like what you would expect a mold to look like up close, but those little red balls were just so cool. I couldn't resist, even though I was not able to identify what they were. Even the fungus, the mycologist that I emailed, said he had no idea what they were, and you would probably have to ask someone who's an expert on the roots of orchids specifically, just because there are so many species of fungi, and each one might be completely specialized to only grow in certain habitats or in certain conditions. So yeah, I
And,
thought that
and
was really cool.
and if you don't know what it is, definitely don't do the taste test for it. So we'll wait until we find that expert.
Yeah, that's generally a good rule with any fungi. Fungi can be very, 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 very toxic. So
Yes. N-
unless you are 100% sure in your identification, putting fungi in your mouth is a bad
Good PSA. All right. Do you have any more?
idea. Yeah, I got one last one.
Mm.
So I think this actually might be one of the easier ones.
Well, you have overestimated some of my mental prowess, but if I were to begin to guess, it's a beautiful jade color. Makes me think of many things. It makes me think of a soda bottle because of the condensation, but I'm also
Interesting.
going back to one of my earlier guesses because I feel like I've noticed this almost iridescent green on houseflies, big houseflies that I might see.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you are 100% correct. This is a
Yes.
housefly. And your soda bottle comparison was very interesting because this is actually called a blue bottle fly because of that color that kind of looks like the glass of a blue bottle, the iridescent greenish blue color. So this is what it looks like zoomed
Yeah.
out. I love the scientific name of this. This is called Califera vomitoria. Califera, interestingly enough, means bearer of beauty. I think you can guess what vomitoria means. Um, but we were talking earlier about maggot therapy. Another reason why the maggots of houseflies and the eggs of houseflies are very useful is, like I said earlier, they like to feed on rotting flesh. Because houseflies lay their eggs in rotting flesh, they're really useful in the forensic arts, actually,
Mm.
to determine how long a dead body has been dead. They can actually look at the eggs and the larva, if that's the case, and determine how long the body had been dead before the blue bottle flies were able to lay their eggs in
That's another bit of spooky trivia that I did not know that I needed to know. Um, that's amazing. Uh, and so there's two things that I'm taking away. Is one, that it's always more interesting than it might seem from a certain distance.
definitely.
Um, and two, that even when things are dying or decomposing, there's still life somewhere.
Especially when things are dying or decomposing. Yeah, plants are the only thing. Well, not the only thing. There are some, single-celled organisms, but the number of organisms on the planet that can make their own food is very limited. Everything else that can't make their own food has to eat something else, whether it's alive when it's eaten or whether it's dead. And when things die of natural causes, which happens all the time, not all wild species are killed by predators, something has to break that down, and that energy has to go somewhere. And it's definitely a very, very important part of the circle of life. The energy flows from living things, they die, it has to flow to another living thing in order to be broken down into the energy and the component parts that are necessary for new life.
Well, thanks so much for sharing all that, Alex. And that phrase you left us with reminds me of one of our exhibits at the Exploratorium, Energy from Death, that
Yes.
Ultra fans might know, where the dead rats live in the Living Systems gallery of the Exploratorium. So we encourage folks to check that out next time we're open, or see if we can find a link online.
One of the favorites of the BioLab. Definitely recommend checking it out.
Well, I was slightly disgusted, but totally enlightened. Thanks again for your time, Alex, and sharing some of these incredible close-up photos you took.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam.
Now, if you're a fan of Energy from Death, stick around to the end of the program while we share a sneak peek inside the exhibit with you. Up next, we continue our Odd Salon DECAY residency, curated by Kate O'Donnell. Since 2014, Odd Salon has been bringing curious minds together for live salons over cocktails, encouraging both experts and amateurs to take the stage and explore extraordinary and unusual chapters from history, science, art, and adventure. They are a community project centered around a fellowship of speakers and an extended family of members. Curator Kate O'Donnell will share what's in store with us tonight.
Hello, and welcome to the second installment of Odd Salon DECAY, an Exploratorium residency. I'm Kate O'Donnell, a senior project specialist with the Exploratorium, but come to you tonight as an Odd Salon fellow and the lucky curator of this residency. For all of you new oddlings among us, Odd Salon is a community project with chapters in both San Francisco and New York. And all of our stories are told by both experts and enthusiastic amateurs, which means that you can pitch a story to speak. If you'd like to talk at one of our upcoming online salons, join us on Facebook or the email list at oddsalon.com to keep up with our upcoming events and calls for submissions. Or send in your fabulous story ideas to oddsalon.com/speak. Now, Odd Salon is much more than just a program. We are a real-world community of speakers, fellows, and our rowdy, shouty audience. That's right, we are not a quiet show, but we can't really do call and responses in person right now, so we're really just giving you a good excuse to shout at your computer. Here are some of our regular callbacks. Ships, science, maps. We also have a mascot, Harvey the Volpertinger, who likes to travel. You see him here in Thailand and in Australia. He goes all around the world. He's been to every continent. And of course, now he's not doing as much traveling, but you can join him and us at our online salons and at regularly scheduled private virtual events for fellows, members, and Patreon supporters. Visit oddsalon.com to find out more. Our Odd Salon DECAY Exploratorium residency takes place over 3 weeks. Now, last week we looked at decay from the perspective of geology and geologic time. On October 29th, for After Dark Cemetery of Dead Science, we'll consider decay via since disproven scientific theories, from ineffectual farming to derpy depictions of dinosaurs. And tonight at After Dark All That Remains, we visit decay through the biological lens. Tonight, Odd Salon fellow Christina Liu will tell us about the tragic death and hopeful legacy of the world's oldest tree. Then, Odd Salon fellow Egan Hirvela will regale us with tales of the incorruptible and Padre PIO'S life after death. But first, let's take a look at decay through tonight's biological framework and all that remains. The idea of biological decay is, in a certain sense, kind of impossible to divorce from our own mortality. For millennia, humans have sought and failed to defy death. Now, while there are endless examples of this quest to draw from around the world, one of history's most notable immortality seekers was the self-appointed first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. Last week, we explored Qin Shi Huang's preparations for the afterlife. But his magnificent tomb, a literal underground palace buried in a mountain with rivers of mercury, was always plan C. Plans A and B were to not die at all. Now, plan B involved purportedly life-extending treatments, a plan we'll cover in the next installment of Odd Salon Decay on the 29th. Tonight, we look at plan A, which goes as follows. Find the elixir of life. As we discussed last week, Qin Shi Huang was a complicated man. He's known for both some of the greatest accomplishments in Chinese history and for being a tyrant. He was responsible for ending 250 years of war and unifying China, and he was also responsible for nearly 1 million deaths. Some scholars posit that Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality was motivated by the desire to avoid the many angry spirits of his victims that might be waiting for him in the afterlife. Whether it was that, or in a desire for endless power, or simply treasuring every moment, or some other combination of factors, the emperor was determined not to die. And at the time, at least to him, this didn't seem out of the realm of possibility. Millennia before Harry Potter went looking for the Philosopher's Stone, people in both India and China were pursuing the idea of a potion that could grant the drinker eternal life. Historians are unsure where the idea first began, but agree the concept originated in either ancient India or ancient China, preceding the European version by over 1,000 years. Now, Chinese poems dated from before Qin Shi Huang's reign depict a white hare mixing an elixir of immortality on the moon. Versions of the moon rabbit legend appear in folklore throughout Asia, as documented in at least 9 different countries throughout the continent. And the white rabbit was but one of a number of tales of immortality circulating during Qin Shi Huang's reign. According to the records of the Grand Historian, written about 100 years after the first emperor's death, Qin Shi Huang's court alchemist/sorcerer, Su Fu, told him of mystical islands home to immortals. At the heart of the islands lay Mount Penglai, purportedly home to immortal humans, including Anqing Sheng, a Taoist wizard believed to be already more than 1,000 years old. Legend says that everything on the mountain appeared white, while its palaces were made from gold and platinum and jewels grew on trees. The island was free of agony and winter. Rice bowls and wine glasses were never empty, and enchanted fruits or herbs could heal any ailment, grant immortality, or even raise the dead. It's a little unclear how much of this legend was believed at the time, but we do know that Qin Shi Huang had faith in the existence of the island, the really old wizard, and the immortality-granting plants. And thus began Su Fu's grand adventure. Qin Shi Huang decided to dispatch his court sorcerer and alchemist to find Mount Penglai and return with the herbs or fruits of immortality. So how does one pack for such a journey? Well, you're going to need 60 of these, as well as 3,000 virgin boys and girls, obviously. Why their sexual history mattered is a different patriarchy for a different day. So, ships and virgins in tow, in approximately 219 BCE, Su Fu set off. He and his armada sailed, and spoiler alert, did not find the island. Now, put yourself in his shoes for a minute. You've been dispatched by a homicidal tyrant on an impossible journey to find the one thing this tyrant wants more than anything in the world. When you inevitably come up empty-handed, if you value your life, you'd probably be thinking twice about returning with the answer, "Sorry, I got nothing," which is where giant sea monsters come in. Su decided to return and just lie to the emperor with the very best dog ate my homework excuse ever. They couldn't reach Mount Penglai, he said, because they were deterred by giant freaky fish. That's right, sea monsters ate Su Fu's homework. Who knows what level of skepticism, if any, this was met with. But it is said that Qin Shi Huang then had a dream in which he struggled with an ocean god in human form. Upon consulting a dream interpreter, Qin Shi Huang was told that the water god cannot be seen but may manifest in the form of a large fish or dragon. He accepted Su Fu's explanation and bade him try again. this time with a fleet of archers to kill the giant fish and maybe some fishing gear to go along with. Now, it's written that Su Fu both lied to the emperor about the dreaded sea monster and was the one who requested the archers. So why would he have needed them if he knew no sea monster existed? Well, according to the records of the grand historians, Su set sail again for a second time, came to a place with, quote, flat plains and wide swamps, stopped, proclaimed himself king, never to return. Any king needs a few good archers. Spoilers. Spoilers. So he wasn't just king of anywhere. This is where it gets particularly interesting. It's believed that Su Fu landed in Japan, and ancient scholars credited him with being the founding father of ancient Japanese society. Well, that part's a little bit disputed. It is impossible to be sure, but we do know that around the time of Su's journey, Japan underwent a dramatic transformation in which the culture that had existed for 6,000 years suddenly disappeared, and in its place came new technology and agricultural techniques, likely from China. In Japan, Su Fu is known as Jofuku and is honored as kami, or spirits of farming, medicine, and silk. There are multiple temples to him around the country, including this one. While the Chinese story of Su Fu ends with his last departure, Japanese stories of him under the name Jofuku abound after his arrival in Japan. Among the many legends, that he went to the top of this mountain, met a hermit, and obtained furofuki, an elixir of immortal life. And in a certain sense, he did find it. I mean, Su lived more than 2,200 years ago, and yet you can visit his statues and temples today. He even has a Marvel Comics character named after him. You know, just because our bodies decay doesn't mean our legends have to. Which brings me to tonight's invocation from 20th century Chinese philosopher Hu Xi. On the basis of biological, sociological, and historical knowledge, we should recognize that the individual self is subject to death or decay. But the sum total of individual achievement, for better or worse, lives on in the immortality of the larger. Cheers. And with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker tonight, Odd Salon fellow Christina Liu, and the story of the world's oldest tree. Take it away, Christina.
Hi. My name is Christina, and I am an Odd Salon Fellow in San Francisco, and I'm here to tell you about the death of the oldest tree in the world. It starts in the summer of 1964 in a grove of trees in Wheeler Peak in Nevada. At this time, we have a young grad student, a geographer by the name of Donald Rusk Curry. He is a National Science Foundation Summer Fellow, and he is up there to study the climate change events of the Little Ice Age. Now, I know people may be wondering, what do modern trees have to do with ancient climates? Well, there's a field of study called dendroclimatology, which uses tree rings to answer questions regarding climates. So this guy, Dr. Edmund P. Shulman, was the first to really ask the question of, can we use tree rings as a record to what climates of the past would have been like, and then from that, can we predict what the climate will be like? So in 1939, Shulman starts looking for old trees. He finds some. He finds an 860-year-old ponderosa pine in Bryce Canyon. But that tree is not old enough. He finds a 975-year-old ponderosa pine in central Utah, and this tree is still not old enough. He finds a tree in Sun Valley, Idaho, a limber pine that is 1,650 years old, and that tree is still not old enough. Shulman is looking for trees that are older than Jesus. Finally, after almost 2 decades of searching, he finds a bristlecone pine in the summer of 1957. So bristlecone pine, Pinus longavia. The one that he finds is named Methuselah. At the time that he counted the tree, this tree was 4,600 years old. So with dendroclimatology, Curry is able to use these tree rings as records of precipitation spanning thousands of years. And he's able to do this because as trees grow, if there are higher levels of precipitation, they grow thicker rings. And if there are lower levels of precipitation, these tree rings grow thinner. So a question that I bet a lot of people are asking is, why do bristlecone pines live for so long? And truth is, nobody knows the answer to that. But the better question to ask is, why does it take them so long to die? And that is a question we do have an answer to. And that is because they are affected by the environment that they grow in. So bristlecone pines grow in very high elevation, from 9,000 feet to 11,000 feet above sea level. They grow in very specific types of soil. That has to be limestone, marble, dolomite, or quartzite. And these trees usually have to be grown on a very gradual slope. This type of soil is incredibly alkaline and incredibly low in nutrient. So low in nutrients that these pine needles will stay on the trees for 40 years. These trees do not have enough nutrition to drop needles and regrow them every single year. These trees also grow incredibly slowly. And in the harsher parts of the mountains, it can take as much as 50 years to grow 1 foot. So not only can these trees survive in really harsh conditions, they require it. The really old ones are actually mostly dead because as they grow, they begin to leach nutrients out of the soil. Eventually, they'll use up all the nutrients and begin to die back. Now, bristlecone pines have an incredibly interesting adaptation called strip barking. And this is where if there is one strip of bark, and it can be as small as 1 or 2 inches, as long as there is one strip of bark alive on the tree that goes to the root, this tree can still pull nutrition and water up through the soil and keep growing. So the harder the conditions, the slower the growth, the tougher the tree. These trees grow so slowly that they create incredibly dense wood. And this wood is so dense that it takes about as long to decay as it does to grow. And this incredibly dense wood will become a problem for our young grad student, Curry. So Curry decides, and he chooses a tree to take a core sample of. It's pretty unremarkable looking, it's mostly dead, and it's only about 28 feet tall. And he numbers his tree WN114, and he begins to take his boring tool, sticks it in the tree, and starts turning to try to get a core sample. But he hits a point where his bore gets stuck in the tree. And at this point, it's a crisis for him because this tool is incredibly expensive. It was about $1,000 in 1964 money. And he was also only up there for a very limited amount of time because he's only up there for the summer. So he goes and contacts the Forest Service and asks them, is it okay if he cuts down the tree to retrieve his tool? And the Forest Service says, yes, that's okay, and help him cut down the tree. So after he does that, he takes his tool and gets a section of the tree and brings it back to the lab. Now in the lab, he is counting the rings by microscope because they are just that tiny. And he is counting for days. After he's done, he realized that WN114, also known as Prometheus, was at least 4,900 years old. So officially, on August 6, 1964, after seeing almost 1.8 million sunrises, Prometheus was dead. And this is an actual photo of the stump of Prometheus that you can go visit on Wheeler Peak if you want. So it is incredibly tragic that Prometheus dies, but Prometheus's death was not in vain because after this, tighter restrictions of the cutting down of trees in that grove were enacted. Curry eventually does help to lobby Congress in the creation of Great Basin National Park, because before this grove of trees was not protected as part of that park. Eventually, Curry stopped studying bristlecone pines. I'm assuming this was a rather traumatic event for him. And for the rest of his days, he goes and he studies ancient relics in ancient lake beds, far, far away from trees. There is good news, because Methuselah, remember the tree from the beginning, is currently the oldest known single living tree in the world. Methuselah is 4,852 years old. Methuselah is not only alive, but producing cones and still reproducing. The exact location of Methuselah is kept a secret for its own protection, but you can go walk by the grove that Methuselah is in, because it's in the White Mountains in California. So these trees, because of their incredibly long-lived days, they become an incredibly pivotal tool for the calibration of carbon dating. So carbon dating works because things that were once living have known quantities of carbon-14 and carbon-12 that we can measure to derive the age from. Now, in the 1960s, though, radiocarbon dating was not accurate. There were discrepancies coming up in artifacts of known verified ages. For example, artifacts that were verified as Iron Age artifacts were coming back as Bronze Age artifacts, and vice versa when they do the radiocarbon dating. But if only we had something that was an accurate record of carbon going back thousands of years. And that is the bristlecone pine trees. So by coring the trees that are still alive or of a known age, we can accurately measure the levels of carbon-14 and carbon-12 from the exact tree ring. And because of this work, artifacts all over the world were reclassified and accurately dated. So not only can the live wood tell us things about the past, the dead wood can also tell us things about the past in a technique called cross-dating. So in cross-dating, you take a piece of wood that was once alive and you compare it to a piece of dead wood, and you try to match up the tree and see if any of the rings match up. And if any of the rings match up, this means that the trees were alive at the same time together. And from that, you can take the dead wood and take even older dead wood and keep doing this backwards leapfrogging to figure out what the climate of the past was like. And with this method, scientists have been able to go back and have an idea of the weather patterns back to about 8,800 years, which is pretty amazing. So I would like to raise a toast. I have two toasts today. The first one is to the amazing park rangers for their tireless protection of these trees. And the second one is that we, like these trees, fight disease and destruction with everything we've got for a stronger tomorrow. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Christina. And I'm going to second that shout out to our national park workers. Next up, we have Odd Salon fellow Egan Hirvela, who is going to tell us the very odd tale of the Incorruptibles. Welcome, Egan.
Hi, my name is Egan Hirvela. I'm a fellow with the Odd Salon chapter in San Francisco, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about a very interesting subject I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time. All right, so on March 3rd, 2008, a group of roughly 15,000 people gathered to watch the exhumation of the revered Saint Padre Pio at his burial crypt in the Sanctuary of Saint Mary of Graces in San Giovannini Rotondo, Italy. His exhumed body went on display for the first time since his death, almost 40 years after he died, and only about 5 years after he was canonized. This was also done in part to see whether his body had decomposed since his burial in 1968. See, bodies that undergo little or no decomposition or delayed decomposition are sometimes referred to as incorrupt or incorruptible. In Roman Catholicism, if a body is judged as incorruptible after death, Traditionally, this has been a sign that the saint in question, the person might be a saint. But what was the state of Padre Pio's body after his exhumation? Well, let's first take a look at the steps that lead to sainthood. So we can see the 4 steps that are here, but there's also, after this, there has been a long-standing tradition of exhuming the bodies of would-be saints to check for incorruptibility. There have been roughly about 100 or so reported cases of incorruptibility over the last millennium by the Roman and Orthodox Catholic religions. Most of these have occurred in Europe, although a few have been reported in South America, Africa, and India. These ritual inspections are performed very rarely and can only be performed by a bishop according to requirements of canon law. Often, the bodies of saints that have been found incorrupt are put on display in sealed glass boxes and placed under the altars of churches for the faithful to view. There are numerous accounts of incorruptibility that have been recorded, and even in more recent years, studied by persons outside of the church. One example of a well-known incorruptible is Zita, patron saint of maids and domestic servants. She's also appealed to as the finder of lost keys. She was born in the Tuscany village of Monsangrati in Italy in 1212 and became a servant of the Fatinelli household at age 12. During her life there, she was renowned to be eternally kind and charitable to all she encountered, even in the face of extreme adversity. And even to the people who abused her, she was so kind that she ended up turning them around and making them of the faithful. She died at the age of 60 in 1272. It is said that at the moment of her death, a new star could be seen in the heavens. About 150 miracles were attributed to her. Her body was exhumed in 1580, over 300 years later, and discovered to be incorrupt, and has since then been mummified, has become mummified. Saint Zita's body is currently on display for public veneration at the Basilica of San Fediano in Lucca. She was canonized by Pope Leo X in 1696. Another well-known incorruptible saint was Saint Bernadette Sobrius of Lourdes, who is said to have seen images of the Virgin Mary multiple times in a nearby cave grotto in Massabielle, France. After numerous visitations to the grotto and seeing the visions of Mary, a spring was said to have miraculously formed there that was responsible for numerous cures and that were deemed completely inexplicable. She died in 1879 at the age of 35 due to complications from cholera, asthma, and tuberculosis. The Catholic Church exhumed the body of Sobrius on September 22nd, 1909, in the presence of representatives appointed by the church, 2 doctors, and a sister of the community. They all claimed that although the crucifix in her hand and the rosemary that she was holding were totally oxidized, her body was incorrupt, preserved from decomposition. This was cited as one of the miracles to support her canonization. They eventually washed the body and returned it, put the body back for burial in a new double casket. She was actually exhumed 3 more times after that, with more decomposition readily apparent. The final report by Dr. Comte in 1928 had this to say about his examination of her remains. What struck me during the examination, of course, was the state of perfect preservation of the skeleton, the fibrous tissues of the muscle, still supple and firm, of the ligaments and of the skin, and above all, the totally unexpected state of the liver after 46 years. One would have thought that this organ, which is basically soft and inclined to crumble, would have decomposed very rapidly, or would have hardened into a chalky consistency. Yet, when it was cut, it was soft and almost normal in consistency. I pointed this out to those present, remarking that this did not seem to be a natural phenomenon. So as has been observed in many cases of exhumed saints, the bodies sometimes appear to be mummified, or in several instances become mummified shortly after exhumation. However, the church has very strict rules about what incorruptibility means, primary of which is that the body cannot have been embalmed in any way prior to being interred. We'll go more into this a little bit later, but for the time being, the rule was that the exhumed bodies should not show any signs of rot and decay. Enter Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, more commonly known as Padre Pio worldwide. He was born Francesco Forgione in 1887, but was given the name Pius, Pio in Italian, when he joined the Order of Friars Minor Capuchin, better known as the Franciscan Order. He grew up in Pietrelcina in the southern Italian region of Campania. His parents raised him very religiously, and he went to church every day growing up. He was brought to the Capuchin monastery in Moricone in 1897, where he presented to the order of the monks there. They said they would consider his acceptance into the order after he received a more formal education, which he eventually got thanks to his dad. He was finally made a novitiate in 1903 at the age of 15. During his time as a priest, Padre Pio was known to exhibit several mystical and miraculous phenomena. He was known to display stigmata at an early age and continued to do so up until his death. About this, he wrote to one of his former mentors in 1911. Then last night, something happened which I can neither explain nor understand. In the middle of the palms of my hands, a red mark appeared, about the size of a penny, accompanied by acute pain in the middle of the red marks. The pain was more pronounced in the middle of the left hand, so much so that I still feel it. Also under my feet, I can feel some pain. Further investigation into this was conducted by the church. In 1954, the wounds were studied by several physicians, some hired by the Vatican as part of an independent investigation. Some claimed that the wounds were unexplainable and never seemed to have been infected. Many critics, both contemporary and posthumously, claimed that he was faking this, though, by applying carbolic acid to make it appear like stigmata. This was corroborated by the testimony of a local pharmacist in 1919. I was an admirer of Padre Pio, and I met him for the first time on July 31st, 1919. He gave me personally an empty bottle and asked if I would act as a chauffeur to transport back from Foggia to San Giovannini Rotondo with 4 grams of pure carbolic acid. He explained that the acid was for disinfecting syringes for injections. This, of course, was disputed by the church, saying that he and other priests needed the substance as a sterilizing agent in the administration of shots given to help combat the Spanish flu, which was sweeping the world at that time. He was also cited as having performed several other miraculous abilities, namely bilocation, soul reading, which it was said he used on his parishioners several times, visited by spirits. In one instance, he was claimed to have actually done battle with Satan himself. Transverberation. Padre Pio was said to have been praying for the end of World War I when this occurred, and prophecy. Throughout his life, he was met with much skepticism and scrutiny from the church. The ruling popes in the 1950s and early 60s claimed that Padre Pio was essentially nothing more than a charlatan. But in the end, he was eventually vindicated by those who questioned his authenticity. Namely, Pope Paul XI dismissed all negative claims against him in the mid-1960s, and even went so far as to urge parishioners to go see him perform Mass. Padre Pio died in 1968 at the age of 81, while in a simple cell dwelling where he lived. Those closest to him say that his stigmata had all but disappeared a few days before he passed on. His body was buried on the 26th of September in a crypt in the Church of Our Lady of Graces. His Requiem Mass was attended to by over 100,000 people. Even to this day, Padre Pio has a large number of followers and believers. But this is not the end of his story for Padre Pio. There was still the question of whether or not he should be beatified and or canonized. An investigation was opened on his case in 1982, and he was eventually beatified in 1999 and canonized in 2002 by Pope John Paul II. So was Padre Pio incorrupt? The answer is mostly. On the 3rd of March 2008, the body of Pio was exhumed from his crypt 40 years after his death, so that his remains could be prepared for display. A church statement described the body as being in fair condition. Archbishop Domenico Umberto di Ambrosio, papal legate to the shrine of San Giovanni Rotondo, stated, "The top of the skull is partly skeletal, but the chin is perfect, and the rest of the body is well preserved." Archbishop Di Ambrosio also confirmed in a communique that the stigmata was not visible. He said that in Pio's hand, he looked at Pio's hands and said that they looked like they had just undergone a manicure. It was hoped that morticians would be able to restore the face so that it would be recognizable. However, because of its slight deterioration, his face was covered within a lifelike silicone mask, which was actually pretty common with a lot of the other incorruptible saints, by the way. Either wax or silicone masks were used to kind of not scare people away, really. It was planned that his body would be shown in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, but that was overturned by the friars of his home church in San Giovannini Rotondo. A saint does not go on pilgrimage. It is the other way. It is the others who go on pilgrimage to see the saint. They were quoted as saying. On April 19th, 2010, Padre Pio's body was moved into the golden mosaic crypt in the new San Padre Pio Church, where thousands of people visit daily. There's still quite a bit of skepticism about the veracity of incorruptibility. The church has since stopped using incorruptibility as a sign or requirement for sainthood, but the research goes on as to how and why this happens. So over the last 35 years, a new view of incorruptibles have begun to emerge. At the Vatican's request, Italian pathologists, chemists, and radiologists have been poring over the bodies of the ancient men and women interred into church reliquaries. The leading belief, led by notable professors such as Ezio Fulcieri, believed that under conditions, a perfect microclimate could form during entombing that might allow for certain bodies to become perfectly preserved. This lends credit to the fact that some bodies quickly decay when being exposed to air. Another theory is that some saints were accidentally mummified by the application of holy oils, fragrances, and linens, as was inspired in the Bible by when Jesus was interred after his crucifixion. Also used in some cases, an antibacterial residue was used from various species of aloe that grow in southern and eastern Africa were detected on some bodies. Human tampering was also not above suspicion in some instances. In some early cases in the 17th century, it was found that some bodies were injected with diverse substances such as wine, turpentine, alcohol, vermilion, rosemary, all into the arteries of human cadavers. That's not to say that all the incorruptibles can be explained by current science. In the case of Zita, there was no evident signs of tampering with her body when a forensic investigation of her remains was undertaken. So in the end, though, there's still a lot left to be learned about why this happens. But despite what science uncovers, it does not alter the fact that there are millions of people all over the globe who still believe in miracles such as what Padre Pio exhibited. So I'd like to take a moment to raise a glass, both to the scientists and the believers. May whatever you discover bring you satisfaction. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Egan. Cheers indeed. That wraps up our second installment of Odd Salon DECAY, our Exploratorium residency. Be sure to join us for the third and final chapter, not next week, but the week after at After Dark Online. We'll see you then.
Thank you, Kate, and all of our Odd Salon contributors. They'll be back with us on October 29th during After Dark Online, Cemetery of Dead Science. Join us next week for After Dark Online to find out what lies beneath with After Dark Online Under the Bay. For now, we'll close tonight's program with a sneak peek behind our world-famous Energy from Death exhibit. A fair warning, this is not for the faint of heart, as it does feature a corpse of an animal in decay. We hope you enjoy. Thanks for continuing to learn with us, and we'll see you next time.